everyone. Welcome to the African Parliamentary Book Launch. We're very excited that you could join us today. We're going to take just 1 minute to 2 minutes to welcome everybody. If you can just in the chat, let us know where you're joining us from. Just type in your name and say hi to colleagues on the line. Let us know where you're joining us from as we wait for the rest of our participants to join into the call. And I will shortly hand over to my director, Dr. Candice Moko. But just for some housekeeping, you will notice, in case you're in the wrong interpretation group, you will notice just at the bottom there of your screen, there's a mute original audio. If you need to turn your transcriptions to French, if you want to join the French version or group, you may do so. Just mute your original and turn to French. But if you need to be here in the English version, then that's brilliant. You're in the right group. So welcome, welcome everybody. I see the chats coming in. We're just going to give it 1 more minute, and then Dr. Candice Moko from CLEARAA will then do the official welcome remarks. All right, thank you. I think we can get started. Dr. Candice Moko, take it away.
Thank you so much, Talita. Honorable guests, partners, and colleagues, it is with great pleasure and excitement that I address you today and welcome you to the official launch of the African Parliament's Evidence Systems for Governance and Development books, volumes 1 and volume 2. Some of you might not know that, but the contributors and the editors surely do. It was intended to be 1 book, but we had such an expansive amount of information and knowledge to share that eventually we ended up with 2 volumes. So it was a long journey, it was a hard journey, but we are so thrilled to be able to launch these 2 books today. And we are even more thrilled that you've chosen to join us for this launch, and hopefully we'll have an exciting conversation. We'll shortly provide you with the history and overview of what led us to producing these books. But what I can say is that we do hope that in producing such an expansive volume of work, that it will provide deeper insights into and contribute to building knowledge around the critical role of parliaments in the evidence ecosystem and the use of evidence for policy making and decision making to attain the development goals and aspirations that we all hold dear for us in this development space. Our work as CLEARAA really is focused on and has been in the recent five years or so, really focused on strengthening M&E systems and the creation of countrywide and national systems for monitoring and evaluation. And that means we are really committed to working holistically and working on all aspects of the evidence ecosystem, and that in building capacity for M&E, it's not just the technical capacity to produce the knowledge, but what happens when that knowledge is there and that evidence is there. What can we do to strengthen the ability of organizations, of governments, of all sectors of society to use that evidence to take better decisions for course correction in programming, in policy making and development. And parliaments, of course, are a critical feature of the state, a critical actor and role player in ensuring that better policy making leads to better decision making. So today we'll hear from the various authors or some of the authors and contributors to the book, And to this effect, let me very, very quickly walk you through the agenda and the program for the session. So first of all, we'll start with Dr. Linda Khumalo, who is also one of the editors of the book. And she'll provide opening remarks on why produce a publication on evidence use in African parliaments, the vision and background to the publication. Dr. Khumalo is an associate at the Pan-African Investment and Research Services, and she specializes in M&E and social research. This will be followed by a keynote address by Honorable Senator Dr. Langton Chikukwa, Member of Parliament of the Parliament of Zimbabwe, as well as the treasurer and chairperson of the Zimbabwe chapter of APNODE, which is the African Parliamentarians Network on Development Evaluation. After Honorable Chikukwa, we will have the pleasure of hearing the sentiments of 4 contributors to the book, and I will introduce each of them individually and their brief bios to you. Thereafter, you as the audience will be provided with an opportunity to engage the contributors, and this will be facilitated by Dr. Kobena Hansen, who is the APNODE Head of Secretariat. A final synthesis will be provided by Dr. Caitlin Blazer-Mapitsa, who is a Senior Lecturer and the Research Director at the University of the Witwatersrand, and at the School of Governance, and also a co-editor of the publication. And she'll be synthesizing and looking at key emerging issues and possibilities for the future. Finally, we'll have a vote of thanks offered by Ms. Matsidiso Kotatso Semela, who is the Strengthening Legislature's Business Line Lead at CLEARAA. Just a quick note about the competition, because I'm sure if you've looked at the flyers and the brochures, you've seen that there is a competition that we've been running to win one of 5 copies of the book. So please do stay tuned. We will have an announcement about that at the end of the session. And we really do hope that you will enjoy the session. So allow me to firstly give a brief bio of Dr. Khumalo, and I will introduce you to her and hand over to her for the opening remarks. So Dr. Khumalo, who in her work with CLEARAA spanning 4 years, has worked with African parliaments and other government stakeholders, facilitating evidence use in policymaking and advocating for the use of evaluation results for greater development outcomes. Linda's research interests include participatory development communication and transformative power, science engagement approaches, politics and power contestations in evidence ecosystems, and the decolonization of Made in Africa evaluation. Dr. Khumalo would, as I said earlier, talk to us on why produce a publication on evidence use in African parliaments. Dr. Khumalo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Candice, and hi to everyone. Hello. I hope that I am audible, and to those that I haven't met, hi. As Candice has introduced me, my name is Linda Khumalo, Dr. Linda Khumalo, and I am a CLEARAA alumni in the Strengthening Legislatures program. So what I'm going to do today is spend 5 to 7 minutes just going through the vision of the books. If you cannot see my screen, please just give an indication so that I have an idea whether you are with me. Okay, great. So it is quite an interesting journey, and I really think that 7 minutes is really just summing it all up. But it has been a 3-year, if I put it lightly, 3 years of a lot of hard work and a lot of dedication. So this is where we started. I'm just going to do this in 3 parts. I will first give a little bit of a background and rationale to the initiative, which was really linked to the CLEARAA program on strengthening evidence use in parliaments. Then I will speak to the key events that are very significant in really the birth or the planning that took place and conceptualizing the volumes, which, as Dr. Morkel stated, started as 1 book. I will also highlight the collaborative approach that we adopted in this initiative. Okay, so we had a very interesting program on parliaments, which we started off with as mostly capacity building, focused on members of parliament and sensitizing them on using evidence and using evaluation specifically for decision making. And some of you may have been part of the program and seen how it grew from a focus on MPs towards a more integrated focus, which was more on a systems approach. So looking at it with researchers and development organizations and other capacity building players who also contributed to strengthening evidence use. So the reason why we sort of ended up with this volumes was while we were in that work, we learned a lot around the gaps. And these were really both theoretical and in practice, in basically finding information. Like we were working in mostly East and sometimes Southern and West Africa through the collaboration with APNODE. But it was really a difficult task to find current information on parliamentary practice relating to evidence. So we learned most of what we did through practice and engaging with MPs and researchers. So we definitely found that there was a need to have more of that information in a more systematic manner. Yes, different parliamentary websites have some good reports here and there, but we found that some of what we might now define as basic, like how many parliamentary committees are in the parliament, how many researchers, do they have, how many units, what are the structures, what are the systems that actually support evidence in parliaments, you know, were not really easy to find. And these lessons and this sort of information that we gathered needed to be somewhere, you know, in a more central place, and specifically on the African parliaments, which is also an interesting context, which has different colonial heritages, which has impacted a lot on the current state of development, and parliaments fit in there very directly. So we started to understand the various complexities really that are in the space and the need for us to sort of harvest these lessons. What we then found was that, and that is what informed the approach of the books, was that there was a more systematic approach, what we call the ecosystems approach, in understanding evidence use in parliament. So there was no way that we were going to be able to work in isolation with MPs on their own, without working with researchers, without working with internal and external stakeholders that support evidence in parliament, and working with other state actors. For example, in different countries, you have what they call national evaluation systems, and there are different players in those systems, which also are mostly executive players. So those kind of interactions is what inspired the need for such volumes. As I said, it was a really interesting space, but difficult to find information and to understand, you know. Most of the times you attend an evidence-informed policymaking conference, one or the other, there's this notion of politics of evidence. And, you know, there's this idea that evidence is political at the end of the day, and should we really be aspiring for evidence use without understanding the political contestation? And as you would know, and as you're part of the books, most of you would understand that the political nature of parliament. So I think that for us was really the rationale for getting to where we got to. There's a lot really that inspired this, and I will not try not to repeat myself, but there were some nuances that we identified. For example, how parliaments really engage with the executive, like what are the linkages there? We have national evaluation systems, which are really a great focus right now in the field of M&E, but the interaction, you know, and with parliaments, is there an interaction? How is that? So those kind of gaps we had to document. And also the broader overview, you will notice in the volume 1, which is more theoretical, there are really good chapters that get into that linkage. Sometimes there is the gap of seeing Parliament without understanding the broader governance landscape, which is quite critical if we were to say that evidence should result in democratic development outcomes. So that kind of linkage was missing as well. And I think we have really done a sort of started off on a good note in presenting where that linkage comes in and how parliaments fit in. And there's also, without getting into who wrote what, but there are also good chapters that have used frameworks that it is so difficult sometimes to sit down and identify which framework applies to which context in terms of understanding evidence in parliaments. But there's, in volume 1, a real good effort to bring those in together and to say, so how are these structures actually interacting? So those are really exciting contributions that we think we have nailed. And then a lot of empirical information there as well, because we've worked with a lot of researchers in Parliament who eat, drink, sleep evidence and really are at the crux of this work. So this is really what makes these books amazing, the fact that they are for parliaments, by parliaments, with parliaments. So we have worked with parliaments, but we have also had a great opportunity of authoring these volumes with people who are in the space and understand it. So again, an important part is the sharing and learning that is so central to the vision of this book. It was really about, okay, we have this program, how are we going to help the work to continue to go forward? How are we going to foster collaboration? So we hope that this is really where we're going. Okay, I'm getting there. The vision was really conceptualized. So there are 2 key workshops. Well, there were a lot of gatherings, as you can imagine, but for this presentation, I just included these 2. So when we had what we call the peer learning program, strengthening evidence use, we had various players, and I will mention them in the next slide. But we had what we call the reflection workshop, which we held in 2018. And this is where we sort of had discussed lessons learned and what are we going to do next. And here, the birth of sort of the publication. And here I will give credit to my colleague, Caitlin. Caitlin is the master of coming up with all good things, and publications is at the top of the list. So she actually proposed that we have like what we had called a resource guide, but at that point it wasn't a book. So yeah, that's sort of where it started. And then the following year, we decided to have a planning and conceptualization workshop. I think most of our key partners were there. I'll show the partners in the next slide, where we really started asking ourselves, what are the themes? What are the sections? What are we targeting? Who's who? What are we going to do? So we really got into it. And this was in Nairobi in 2019, hence I'm saying 3 years. I'm just being sort of estimating the timeframes. But this is where we started with abstract and really getting into the content of the book. So if we have to say the birth, perhaps 2019 is more accurate. Then quickly, so I think you have also noted that this was really, while sitting at CLEARAA, it was really a collaborative initiative, and with diverse, I mean, you can see the authors, it's just amazing. We have parliaments represented from so many countries. We had very good internal peer reviewers as well, who work from different organizations that CLEARAA has worked with. And in volume 2, which really makes volume 2 really unique, is the rich case studies. You will notice we have case studies from various parliaments, and we're also very fortunate to have the regional parliament representation. So just quickly, you know, in the book, you also notice in the acknowledgement, in the books, we have really listed the people that we worked with. But here I will mention the key players that we had in the collaborative initiative: Twendembele, APNODE, we had AFIDEB, ASEPA, and then we had UN Women, we had the INAS, and we also had CLEAR GIMBA, we also had CPST in Kenya. So we also had representation. I mean, because of APNODE's connection, there would be different parliaments because of the fact that there are different national chapters. So that has always been the diversity that we have really been able to harvest from and have all of these rich insights and rich case studies and these amazing chapters. So I think this has been the vision, this has been the approach. I could spend a day talking about it, but for now, I think you get a picture where we started, and I would love to talk about how we ended up with 2 volumes and stuff, but I will hand over to Dr. Mokel to take us through.
Thank you so much, Linda. Dr. Khumalo. That was brilliant. I think it's so inspirational to hear from you, where the conceptualization started, where you were reflecting on your peer learning approach and how that grew quite organically, I believe, and then, of course, more structured into this collaborative approach of putting it into a publication. So huge congratulations to all the partners who work together. I think that's probably, for me, one of the most amazing things about these volumes is just how collaborative it has been. So next on the agenda, we have the absolute privilege of receiving the keynote address by Honorable Senator Dr. Langton Chikukwa, Member of Parliament of the Parliament of Zimbabwe, as well as the Treasurer and Chairperson of the Zimbabwe chapter of APNODE, which is the African Parliamentarians Network on Development Evaluation. A visionary community leader, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and negotiator, Senator Chikukwa holds a doctorate in business administration with Binary University. He also holds a master's degree in business administration from Zimbabwe Open University. Senator Dr. Chief Al Chikukwa serves as the chairman of the Traditional Chiefs Assembly in Mashonaland, East Province in Zimbabwe, and he has achieved numerous accolades in business, leadership, and community development, including the Presidential Award on Community and National Leadership in 2021. Honorable Dr. Chikukwa, over to you.
It's fine. Thank you very much, Dr. Mokel. And I as well would want to express my appreciation to Dr. Linda Khumalo for such a comprehensive, very informative overview. I would say a job well done, Dr. Hilda and your team, Dr. Linda and your team. From the very onset, I would want to recognize Dr. Candice, once again, Dr. Candice Mokel, Executive Director for CLEARAA, Honorable Dr. Makali Mulu, Member of Parliament Kenya, and the Chair Parliamentarian Caucus on Evidence-Informed Oversight and Decision-Making in Kenya. I would want to as well to recognize Dr. Rose Orange, Director of Public Policy and Communications, AFTEP in Kenya, Dr. Josephine Watera, Head of Monitoring and Evaluation Division, Parliament of Uganda, Professor Tania Ajam, Stellenbosch School of Public Leadership, South Africa, all APNODE members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with much pleasure that I join you this morning on behalf of the APNODE chairperson, Honorable Jeremy Odomohau, who due to a conflict in scheduling cannot be here in person, to say a few words about the essence and timeliness of this publication. African Parliaments, Evidence Systems for Governance and Development, and the potential it offers to legislators such as myself and many others gathered here today. The publication comes at an opportune time as many African countries are trying to get back on their feet post-COVID-19, with their eyes set on getting things right as they focus on attaining their SDG targets, with the deadline, which is just a few years away. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 not only raised health concerns, but also precipitated a global economic crisis by halting business operations for both formal and informal businesses. The economic shutdowns globally, as well as across Africa, had a devastating socio-economic consequences on the economies of many African countries. The positive economic growth that many African countries had been experiencing and witnessing in the previous decade came to a halt. Aside from the negative economic consequences that accompanied COVID-19, the pandemic also exposed the importance of good governance structures to deal with such crises. The essence of good governance structures is exemplified in the fact that having them in place would help a country deal with the various socio-economic challenges of the pandemic and assist in facilitating a nuanced post-COVID-19 recovery. Given that governance-related challenges have often been a feature of many African countries, the COVID-19 pandemic further highlighted the importance of having an effective governance system in place, as well as an effective legislature to provide meaningful oversight of the executive. Ladies and gentlemen, the two-volume publication being launched today, African Parliaments, Evidence Systems for Governance Systems, addresses the important issue of good governance and the role evidence plays in its attainment. To this end, the publication offers invaluable insights and nuanced experiences pertaining to ongoing efforts aimed at enhancing and advancing knowledge on African Parliament's dynamics, threats, possibilities, and opportunities, while simultaneously teasing out experiences and the intricate entanglements that are shaping and redefining the utility and context of evidence use, evaluation, and strengthening capabilities for informed decision, policy making, and sustainable development. The volumes juxtaposes a set of dynamic relations, civil society, verbs, leadership and sustainability, representation, digitalization, and etc., with fluid interpretations of parliamentary evidence use and governance. The capacity leadership governance trichotomy represents an axis of transformation for African parliaments, especially as they individually and collectively strive towards attaining their SDG targets. Contributing authors feed into the ongoing conversations around how the utility of evidence by African parliamentarians and parliaments can be enhanced and advanced. The volumes further deepen the reader's understanding of the complex and rich dynamics at play within the African parliaments, while offering a glimpse at what needs to be done to seize the future. Distinguished guests, I am impressed and excited by the sheer breadth of issues covered by the two volumes and how they have been seamlessly woven together. As a sitting member of parliament that believes in the importance of evidence to inform budget allocation, policy making, and to ensure effective oversight of the executive, I cannot but express my sincere gratitude to the authors and the scholars and the practitioners who helped bring this publication to fruition. In my humble opinion, this publication is a must-read for all MPs, senators, speakers, and parliamentary staffers across Africa and beyond. I hope that CLEARAA and its strategic partners, including the African Development Bank, have plans to translate this publication into multiple languages, that is French, Portuguese, Arabic, and Swahili, such that the knowledge captured here is accessible to as many parliamentarians as well as scholars, practitioners, and students of governance as possible. On behalf of the chairperson of APNODE's Executive Committee, I can confidently say that this publication will be widely disseminated and utilized among our network members once an open source e-version becomes available. More importantly, I commit to ensure that each Zimbabwean National Assembly member gets a copy. Beyond parliaments and MPs, I further believe that this could be in all libraries across the continent and made a core reading text for students of political science, students of public policy, governance, and development, just but to name a few disciplines. The volumes are rich in information and factual evidence, and the scope of topical issues covered is priceless. Again, kudos to the editors and contributors alike for giving us this knowledge product. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not want to speak much longer. As we all are aware, this program is just starting. The organizers have assembled an expert panel comprised of parliamentarians, parliamentary staffers, policy practitioners, and academics, all of whom I believe played a key role in making this publication a reality. To deliberate authoritatively on the theme, perspectives on evidence use in parliaments, reflections from contributions to the publication, I have no doubt that the insights they have to share will leave us all more informed and much more aware of the nature and character of evidence use across African parliaments. Personally, I can't wait to sit back, listen, and learn from the distinguished panelists. Before I conclude, I would like to remind us all to reflect on the past year and the impact of COVID-19 has had on our respective national development agendas. Ask what role and how specifically evidence use can help us build better. We at APNODE undoubtedly advocate the essence of evidence use to achieve transformative development, which is at the heart of APNODE's mandate. I believe these volumes do the same, calling attention to the centrality of evidence use to development. So what can we all do to support evidence use? Drawing on my experience, including years spent as a member of the Parliamentary Committee, I believe, regardless of where we sit on the continuum of evidence generation to utilization, supporting the creation of multi-stakeholder platforms and discussion, such as happening today, around what needs to be done to advance evidence use is vital. Further, I recommend
Senator Chikukwa, can you still hear us? It seems like we've lost your sound. It might just be a network, it probably is a network issue. Let's just wait a couple of seconds. Honorable Chikukwa, can you hear me at all? Okay, I think we've lost him. And I do indeed believe that Dr. Chikukwa was at the end of his address, and I think probably most of what he intended to say has been said. Yes, I can see the network has dropped him off the call. But I do want to say that we really appreciate the partnership of APNODE. We are so pleased that the partnership continues with the CLEAR centers, both the CLEAR Francophone Africa and the CLEAR Anglophone Africa Center. And I think that Senator Chikukwa's words were really meaningful and thoughtful, and of course, very challenging if we think about the challenge of translating the book into other languages. And so we really do take those words to heart. And we thank Honorable Chikukwa for those words. We now will turn our attention to the observations, the perspectives of the panelists who are the contributors to the publications, and they will share their thoughts and reflections on evidence use. Oh, Honorable Chikukwa, I see that you're back, and we were just mentioning how grateful we are for your very meaningful and thoughtful words. We do understand that the network dropped you at the very end of your address, and I'm wondering, are you comfortable for us to move on, or would you like to close off with your final sentence, or are you all right with us carrying on?
It's fine. It's just a final sentence. Thank you very much. More importantly, we need to provide resources and finance to start up ideas and successful critical mass for successful initiatives and a networked learning community with dedicated resources to take good examples to scale. I would want to thank you.
Thank you, sir. This is
I got the last words. In fact, I had almost come to an end. It was just acknowledging and appreciating your attention.
Thank you so much, sir. And your words were incredibly meaningful and really inspiring and challenging. I thank you so very much for those. And I think we did manage to catch everything. Thank you so much. Colleagues, as we move on to the panelists, we are really excited to hear from the contributors. They'll share with us their perspectives. And I'll hand over to our first panelist. It is Dr. Philip Bushere Brighton, who is the Director of the Senate Liaison Office of the Parliament of the Republic of Kenya. Dr. Bushere holds a PhD in Conflict Management and Resolution, as well as an MPhil in Educational Administration Planning and Curriculum Development. Dr. Bushere has worked in the public service for the last 25 years, including serving as the Director, Curriculum Training and Research at the Center for Parliamentary Studies and Training, CPST, from 2013 to 2021. He has written and published numerous articles, as well as authored several books, including The Changing Nature of Security and Intelligence in Africa, a Theoretical Perspective. Dr. Bushere, over to you. Thank you. Dr. Bushere, are you okay with sound? And
now I'm okay with sound. There we go. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loudly and clearly. Thank you.
Okay, let me pick it up from there. First of all, let me begin by thanking Dr. Mokel and the CLEAR team. I need to begin by noting that I'm here representing the Clerk of the Senate and the Secretary of the Parliamentary Service Commission, Mr. Jeremiah Genye. And having said that, let me also join the Senator Chikukwa in thanking the CLEAR team and all the authors of this very important 2 volumes, because this is a very significant step in expanding the frontiers of parliamentary knowledge in Africa, and we are very proud of you as we join in celebrating this occasion where we are launching these. Now, having said that, I think my role here would be to share some perspectives on the use of evidence in terms of how we strengthen the use of evidence in our parliaments. And I would be sharing these perspectives from three point stands. The first point stand would be, I want to share some perspectives in terms of what are some of the success factors and prerequisites for institutionalizing this evidence-based use. And from the Kenyan perspective, I think I want to share a few. The first one is we see the setting up of legislative research departments, which are very robust in our parliaments. We are setting these legislative research departments fully fledged to provide evidence-based use for our members. The second one, we have a very vibrant collaboration between these legislative research departments and public policy think tanks. And I think Dr. Ronje here, AFIDEP, is one such player that we really collaborate with in our parliament, particularly in the area of health. Then the third area is we also have collaborations between universities. And for the Kenyan case, we have a very strong collaboration between ourselves and McGill University, just to strengthen this area of monitoring and evaluation, as well as the use of evidence. And equally, we have our own, the University of Nairobi. And this relationship or collaboration is underpinned by a memorandum of understanding between our parliament and the universities. Then the other third area, the fourth area perspective that I see as a way of strengthening this would be the creation of parliamentary training institutes, these PTIs, which have a research component. And as you've heard, in Kenya, we have the Center for Parliamentary Training and Research, Training and Studies, where I was heading that docket of research and curriculum. Then the third, the other perspective would be in Kenya, we have established a very vibrant parliamentary budget office, which is very key in the area of M&E and the use of evidence. We see this as another way. Then the other perspective would be the establishment of targeted caucuses for members of parliament within the M&E area, so that it aids in the use of evidence-informed decision-making. Also, the last perspective on this would be we undertake targeted M&E capacity building for members and staff of parliament, just to enhance the use of evidence-based. And I think this publication would be very important in facilitating and providing knowledge along these lines. The second perspective I want to look at, how best can partners, scholars, and other partners support parliamentarians to strengthen their appreciation for the role and use of evidence. And the first thing I think is that this kind of initiative that we are having this afternoon or this morning is very critical in doing this. I hope, as the Senator said, these publications will be disseminated far and wide within the parliamentary community. So this would be one way of enhancing this. But most importantly is we need to enhance continuous capacity building, just specifically focusing on M&E and particularly the use of evidence. Then the second perspective would be the partnerships of these like CLEARAA and AFIDEP and other think tanks with parliaments to specifically undertake targeted primary research that will deploy the use of evidence. And this then can be mainstreamed into the committees, committee system, the parliamentary committee system when they are processing their business, so that we find a way of mainstreaming these into their business. The fourth area in this would be this joint publication. We can now do these joint publications. This should be enhanced so that these research outputs are then fed into the ecosystem of the parliamentary system. Then also we can also create and have joint platforms for sharing resources and databases that would easily provide such evidence. And the other thing would be the creation of parliamentary liaison offices, like the one I'm heading, is a very critical office where we liaise with these think tanks, so that is a very easy way of mainstreaming these into the parliamentary process. And the final perspective I want to look at would be how my observations and insights on how the politics of evidence can be better managed to bring about positive outcomes and development priorities. In terms of managing this, I think the first thing is the authenticity of the evidence that we are producing. It must be very authentic. So this will go into the second insight, which is building trust between Parliament and such research think tanks. Once we build that trust, it will be very easy for us to disseminate this evidence in the use of for parliamentarians. And then the third insight, I think, is we need to institutionalize evidence as a drive of parliamentary debates. For example, we have seen this play out when we are doing the division of revenue bill in the Senate, where data and evidence played a very critical role in unlocking a stalemate that was there to do with the formula. Without evidence, it was not going to be easy for this stalemate to be unlocked. Then also the media who report specifically on parliamentary discourse, it's now high time they need to mainstream the use of evidence-based debates as a way of bringing this to the fore. And finally, we need to identify members of parliament who are champions of using evidence-based, and we need to support these ones, such members, so that with the time, this can then become the culture of our parliaments. I think I would want to end there, and once again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buffet. And I think you touched on some of the most important areas in evidence use, evidence production in the state. Hopefully, I'd like to encourage, in fact, our participants to please put your questions, your comments in the chat, because once we've had all panelists, providing their perspectives, we would like to hand it over to yourselves to have an engagement, even if just for a few minutes, on some of the thoughts you've been hearing this morning. Our second panelist is Dr. Rose Oronje, who is the Director, Public Policy and Communications at AFIDEP Kenya, which is the African Institute for Development Policy. Dr. Oronje is the Director of Public Policy and Knowledge Translation, as well as the head of the Kenya office. She is a development policy and communication specialist with over 15 years experience in designing and implementing public policy and governance research, knowledge translation, communication and evidence uptake interventions, as well as capacity development for enabling evidence-informed decision-making in development efforts in Africa. She has designed and led the implementation of multi-year, multi-country programs with African Ministries of Health, African parliaments, as well as parliamentary networks, universities, and research consortia and networks, as well as the media. Dr. Oronje, over to you.
Thank you so much, Candice. It's an honor for me to be here, and good afternoon to everybody here. Recognizing colleagues who are here, Dr. Linda, of course, Dr. Candice, Dr. Buchere, somebody we've worked with quite a bit in Kenya, and of course, Senator Chikuka, just all protocols observed. I'll speak very briefly about two areas of importance for this conversation today. The first one is thinking about the capacity development approaches that parliaments, or rather that need to be elevated or strengthened for better evidence or increased evidence use within parliaments. And I'll just flag some of these. These are things coming out of my own experience as somebody who's designed and implemented programs with parliaments across the region, but also as somebody who has published in this area. If we think about capacity development for evidence-informed decision-making, and that's part of what Dr. Buchere has touched on, a way of making evidence use a culture. So it's a norm, it's something we do every day as opposed to something that we do once in a while. The approaches that would get us to that point, and of course, noting that parliaments are already using evidence, but they're not using evidence in a way that it's our norm, it's a culture, it's used on a day-to-day basis. And so if we are going to move to a place where evidence use within parliaments are culture, these are some of the ideas that I think would work in terms of getting us there. One of them is implementing capacity development approaches that have a systemic focus. Systemic means we are focusing on strengthening structures within parliaments that are tasked with providing evidence. I'm thinking of the budget office, I'm thinking of the research section, I'm thinking of the library, moving from physical libraries to e-library. I'm thinking of it just ensuring basic things like internet reliability is there and functioning. Systemic investments means that we are looking at these, strengthening these structures over time. So it's not a one-off thing, it's not a one-off activity that is supported by a donor, but it's actually an activity that Parliament decides that within the next 5 years, we are going to focus on these structures, putting in budgets every year to ensure that we bring them at a level where they can sustainably enable parliamentarians to use evidence on a day-to-day basis. The other approach that I think would get us to an evidence use culture within Parliament is also thinking of approaches that focus on behavior change. Evidence use, or the way we use evidence actually is about changing behaviors. You know, our MPs asking for evidence, you know, our staff thinking about evidence the moment they're asked to put together background papers, for instance. And so that's about behavior change. How they think about evidence, how they do their work. And when you think about that, then you realize that you need to think about the incentive systems. And so we need approaches that think about the incentive systems that drive demand and use of evidence within Parliament. We need to think about the politics of evidence use itself, because it's happening in a context where people are used to doing things a particular way. So if we are going to change how they do things in this particular way to another way, we really need to engage the incentive systems, think about ways that we can change the behavior of how they interact and demand and use evidence. The third approach I'll flag that would get us to an evidence use culture is thinking about approaches that put Parliament at the center of these efforts. Sometimes these efforts are funded by donors, but even when they're funded by donors, can we ensure that whatever interventions we're designing as people who are based outside Parliament are really putting Parliament in the driver's seat, so that parliaments can be the ones reviewing their systems, reviewing their knowledge structures and saying, okay, within the research department, this is what we need to do. Within the library unit, this is what we need to do. So that if they sit in the driver's seat for this capacity development efforts, it means that they will actually be able to continue some of these efforts way beyond the funding that the donor may have provided. The other approach is really peer-to-peer learning. I've seen that work very well, where parliaments are facilitated to learn from each other, because there's a lot of innovations going on around the continent and in other parts of the world. And so facilitating departments or even members of Parliament to learn from other parliaments is a really very, very good way of ensuring that you start now changing behavior around evidence use and putting interest or a lot of priority on strengthening structures that enable evidence use. The final approach that I would like to flag for this is thinking about the context. This is something I've learned on the ground, that things that work in Kenya will not work in another country because of the context, because of the way people do things there. So capacity development approaches need to ensure that they're putting the context at the center, to ensure that we are building on opportunities within the context. We are taking advantage of the context, but also addressing barriers within the context for this to have a lasting impact. The final issue I'll speak just for a minute, Candice, I've probably run out of my time. But the final point I'll speak to is as the things that parliaments need to do for them to institutionalize, you know, or strengthen evidence use. And one of them is, I just have 2 points. They are the same, and some of them speak to what I've said already. One of them is ensuring sustained investments. So not just having these investments come from donors, but sustained investments from our own parliaments into these structures. You know, it's very easy to have investments go into committees and the things members of Parliament do in terms of visiting constituencies and all that. But these departments of research, of budget office, of e-library, that's so critical, and they need to be prioritized as well over time. Trainings, as well as refresher trainings for technical staff, is critical. And of course, regular exchange programs. And the final thing I'll say is focusing on MPs, focusing on MPs as important champions of evidence. My interactions with MPs has shown that often a good number of them appreciate the role of evidence within Parliament, but somehow they kind of look at that as thinking about the politics, because politics is life within parliament. Politics are party interests, personal interests. And so they have to balance between evidence and politics and other things. So as people who do programs, thinking about how do we nurture MPs to be champions of evidence within their committees on the floor of the House, but also they have an oversight role. They can play a role in ensuring that structures in the executive that are charged with providing them with evidence or research, like research institutes, evaluation departments, MPs have a role to ensure that these departments are getting the right budgets. Often they're neglected. They're getting the right budgets, but also they're spending those budgets in a way that they generate evidence needed for the country's development. I'll stop there. Thanks, Candice.
It's so wonderful. I could listen to you for a long time, Rose. You can just hear, your experience. And I think you're talking to the real politic of evidence in parliamentary systems. And you're just so spot on. Hopefully, these books will serve as a kind of a handbook, as I think that was the intention, that we could actually draw some lessons out of these and say, okay, how do we convert this into, it demonstrates the challenges, but then also gives us an idea of what can be done differently. I think you were just spot on about some of those. And so for those of you who'd like to read more about that, see volume 1 of the book. The first chapter deals with some of these elements about the politics of evidence-based decision-making in parliamentary systems. But of course, the case studies in volume 2 are really, really interesting and touch on the practical realities on the ground as well. Our third panelist is Ms. Josephine Watera, the Assistant Director of the Department Research Services in the Parliament of Uganda. She is the past Head Monitoring and Evaluation Division in the Parliament of Uganda. She holds 15 years working experience in Parliament in areas of research, monitoring and evaluation, as well as evidence-based systems. She is a board member and convener of the Government Education ITIG, International Development Evaluation Association, that's IDEAS, so the International Thematic Group on Government Evaluation, as well as member of the Joint Advisory Committee at the Africa Centre for Evidence, and some of us know that that is at the University of Johannesburg, and the South Africa Centre of Evidence that is based there. She's also the Vice President of the Uganda Evaluation Association. Josephine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Candice, and allow me just drop my screen here so that I can have a guide to my talk. I really want to appreciate the interjection of presentation, the overview that has given to us by Honorable. So I really acknowledge your presence here, Honorable. And quickly, considering from where we have come from, the debates of evidence and why it matters in Parliament, we see that there is a high demand for members of Parliament and the evolving expectations of citizens to use evidence for decision making. And these are calls that have come way back from the Paris Declaration 2005, Accra Agenda, and then the Busan Declaration of 2011. And we see many parliaments struggling to improve their performance, to make themselves open, independent, accountable, and responsive. And this is the place of evidence that we think as a group here, and the motivation behind us having this book to have this on the table so that we can help parliaments to do even better. But even more critical is this call that has come through the goal 16 of the Agenda 2030. And when you look at the four targets that, the three targets that we have here, the 16.3, 16.6, and 16.7, they all look at the core functions of Parliament, of oversight, representation, and budgeting. So the call reminds us that we need to build systems, and institutionalization of M&E in African Parliament is something we cannot underplay. I've had already a lot that has come through Dr. Ronje and Dr. Bushere capturing these areas of capacity building. And we know that, especially in the context of Parliament, every time we have elections, like in the Uganda Parliament, we lose a lot of capacity in terms of election turnouts. We sometimes go up to 80%. We've lost members who have been there previously. You've built their capacity, have gotten them to a level where they understand what you're talking about, and then boom, elections comes and they have to go. We have no control. So this has to continue, and also on the side of the technical side of the staff, there are a lot of emerging innovations on how to package, how to present evidence that makes it more usable for members of Parliament. So we need to look out at these innovations. Networks have been emphasized, strengthening the internal evaluation processes. When you look at the demand for evidence and use, there's much more that we've seen from chapter 4 when we're writing up this chapter 4, that there's a lot of more demand on the internal generated evidence than the external, and then ensuring that we do oversight of the actions, committees of parliament especially do oversight of actions of evaluations. So every evaluation will have some bit of recommendations and lessons and areas of improvement. It's the role of committees and with our support as technical team, especially to see that members of parliament and committees follow through these actions so that evaluations are actually at the end of the day used. The aspects of political will and champions has also been emphasized, but also more important, the role of Africa Development Bank in empowering the APNODE, Africa Parliamentary Development Evaluation Network, that has seen most parliaments host these chapters, and then these have become centers and platforms for discussions and deliberations on issues of evidence. I will emphasize more on this aspect of submission of reports to Parliament. A lot of evaluation reports out there never make their way to decision table, and so we need to motivate and encourage a lot of these to get their way, and even have access for our parliamentary budget officers and researchers so that they unpack these evidence and have it more usable in form of facilitating and knowledge brokering for members of parliament. And also members and committees of parliament need to be given an opportunity to approve and conduct oversight of evaluation plans. I've seen like in South Africa, they have national evaluation plans, and these are supposed to be guiding what should be evaluated upon. And also these members can also require that every MDA reports to Parliament at the end of the day, the evaluations that have been undertaken through the year. It's also important for us to have repositories for where members of Parliament, even through the committees and through the technical departments like research, can access available evidence, because accessibility is a big factor for purposes of use. And also oversight of improvement plans. When we want to change from evaluations, how is this coming through? So it's also a key factor that we need to consider as we move forward in advancing evidence in parliaments. But behind all this, there's politics that we need to know, and we need to play around it if we are to actually influence evidence use. And that's why chapter 4 of this book is very important, and I encourage all of us to look out to. One is that parliaments are run by multiple actors with different political and institutional interests. We have the technical side of parliament, but we also have the political side of parliament. And if we don't balance this to see when is evidence required, work within the parliamentary calendar, we will not be able to influence decisions. Issues of multi-party.
Apologies, Josephine, to stop you mid-sentence, but I see also on my side and others are saying that the slides are not moving, and it might just be a technical glitch on your side, but we are still on slide 1 on our side. Apologies for that.
Slide 1. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, we are now seeing your slide 6, I think. Perfect.
Okay. So can I keep it here so that I don't put it on full screen, just in case that's what is making it not move? I'll keep it this here.
That's perfect.
So the issue of multi-party politics, sometimes when evidence is more of supporting the ruling party positions, then evidence will be more usable. But we've seen in parliaments like in Uganda, where we have strengthened the opposition, which is mandated to provide alternative policy direction. Also, the opposition uses evidence which the ruling party may have ignored. So it's important for you to understand this landscape and get your way through it. And then aspects of innovation. I've touched on innovation, but parliaments are highly traditional. And sometimes when you bring innovations, there could be a pushback. So you need to know how to package this information so that we allow new things and new ideas to come on the table that are around the evidence ecosystem. Also, it's important for us to get to understand the tense battlegrounds. Sometimes evidence comes when there's a peak of a newspaper article or a newspaper headline that cannot allow us to deliberate with a sober mind. And so evidence needs to be packaged in a way that you need then to get who is a champion in that field of education, of health, to package this information and be the one to push it through when the tempers are high and evidence cannot be used in a way that we actually want. Again, issues of parliament preferring the internal evidence is important. So when we have strong evidence that has come from the external players, it's important that we draw the internal team in, work through the research departments, for example, to push through this evidence so that it gets its way to the committees and also to plenary. Issues of time scales are very important. Parliament works with limited time, and sometimes when this evidence comes in late, then we've lost that window of opportunity to have this being used. So this is very important for us to understand. It's also important to understand the linkage between evidence use and key features of the political system. Who are the decision makers within a party? Who are what's the level of participation, even public participation in a specific decision is important. And also we have learned that centralized political systems are less likely to be open to evidence than decentralized. So this is very key. We've learned this from the Benin Parliament, but also we have emphasized that change in Parliament is very unpredictable. Sometimes things happen so fast when you're still handling one item and then something comes, maybe there's a pandemic, there is a flood, there's an emergency that has happened in a certain community, and that issue comes in and causes the change in the evidence ecosystem that now this becomes urgent for us to produce at that point. So we need to have that aspect of predictability of what could be emerging and work through with everyone, committees of Parliament and the technical team to push through this evidence. So I will just stop here for now. Thank you so much for God and my country.
Thank you so much, Josephine. I mean, also just so much you have to share, and thank you for pointing out exactly where in the book we will find more of that information, more depth around what you've been talking to. I see some questions are coming through, so do please keep them coming, because we're almost at the stage where we will be sharing your questions and answering, or the panelists will be answering some of your questions. And we now have the last but not least panelist is Professor Tanya Ajam. She is the Associate Professor in Public Policy, Finance and Economics at the University of Stellenbosch School of Public Leadership. She's a public policy analyst and an economist with broad experience in the design, analysis and implementation of fiscal policy, intergovernmental fiscal relations and government-wide monitoring and evaluation systems. She served on the Financial and Fiscal Commission for a decade as a commissioner until 2014 and chaired its research committee. She was appointed to the President's Economic Advisory Council in 2019, that is of South Africa. Thank you so much, Tanya. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. And it's wonderful to be here. I'm just going to turn off my camera and then share my screen. Candice, can I ask you to just let me know if for some reason my slides don't advance? I'm just wanting to see are my slides visible?
Yes, it's visible. It is on the display setting where you, as the presenter, see the next slide that's coming up.
Okay, let me just see if I can perhaps change that.
Yes, something is happening. So yeah, it's moving.
Okay.
And
so let's try that. Okay, so I'll just move pretty smartly through my presentation. And I think that Senator Chikukwa must be psychic because my presentation leaves off where starts off where he's ended. I think that if you look at African countries, indeed countries around the world, the pandemic was a massive shock to public health systems, economies, and societies. And it also shifted the balance of power to the executive because so many democratic controls were relaxed due to the emergency circumstances and heightened the need for effective oversight. And in the aftermath, we all faced increased fiscal pressures and hard trade-offs in relation to political, social, environmental, and economic sustainability. And if we think that we can catch our breath, we have another thing coming because the turbulence and volatility is likely to continue. We've got the climate emergency, digital transformation, and the fourth industrial revolution, and how to overcome the digital divide. We've got social media and fake news, declining perceptions of legitimacy of governance due to patronage and clientelism, the need for a gender lens, etc. So there are going to be a lot of challenges which face Parliament. And when I look at the Parliament closest to me, the Parliament of South Africa, we as citizens were saddened and angry when we saw the devastation of that Parliament. But ironically, that physical destruction seemed to match the institutional destruction which happened in the decade of state capture before it. But I believe that this is an opportunity for renewal and rebuilding of parliaments, because as I said, I don't think that they are more needed for the democratic project than now. So coming to why I'm excited about these books, and I think Dr. Linda Khumalo covered many of these, but it contributes to understanding the complex structure and functioning of African parliaments and the role of evidence-informed policy making. And as the previous panelists have noted, it embraces the unique governance and development context, the political dynamics, relationships with the executive, etc., etc. And until you understand those, you can't really implement proper capacity building, which is effective and targeted. And then also it's locating parliamentary institutions within the national ecosystems of evidence and governance in countries like Uganda, Benin, South Africa, and the richness of the case studies, which integrate theory and practice, because there are lots of practical case studies without theory, and then there's academic works which don't really have the empirical richness. And I think that this is a true contribution to that space, and I take my hat off to the CLEAR editorial team for bringing that and coalescing that. So what are the key messages from the publications? I think what stands out for me is the systems approach and the nuanced complexity of the way the subject matter is handled, looking at different components, internal and external functions, purpose, principles, incentives, boundaries, and principles surrounding evidence used by Parliament, looking at the nature of the type of evidence, the demand for evidence, sources of evidence, brokering of evidence, the frameworks and other instruments used, the application of the evidence, who the users are, and how that impacts on policy making, and also acknowledging that there's this dynamic web of interaction among all these different elements at the network or relational perspectives. At a regional level, ECOWAS and the East Africa Legislative Assembly, at a macro governance level within each parliament as an institution itself, and then at a micro level, at committee level and the level of the individual MP. And it also embraces a wide range of stakeholders, which have been mentioned before: parliamentarians, parliamentary staff, researchers, librarians, academia, CSOs, donors, parliamentary associations, mainstream and social media, etc. And it deals with the tensions between the formal culture, which might promote evidence use, and the informal institutions like political culture, trust or mistrust of data, which determine the actual use of evidence. What is also important, and I think all of the speakers have mentioned this, is that the deeply political nature of evidence use. So not just a technical focus, but looking at that convergence of the technical and the political, which is so important in a politically contested space like parliaments. Also looking at the incentive of African parliaments to demand evidence and the opportunity and capacity for them to use this evidence in their core business activities, and what are the factors that shape those, including the individual governance structures, the parliamentary procedures, the orientation of the leadership of the institution, the control and deployment of resources, including budgets, and the complex interactions among party politics, which is in a rapidly changing context. The importance of conscious commitment to evidence use and buy-in, and also the important role of leadership and the structures such as the speaker, presiding officers, the leader of the majority party and opposition parties, leader of government business, whippery, and procedural and liaison committees, which can also influence how evidence is produced and used. Especially important, I think this has been mentioned before, is the role of parliamentary committees. And an important finding of the book is the relationship between parliaments and national evaluation systems. These national evaluations tend to be mediated, driven by the executive, and the relationship often is mediated by the executive, which might limit the use of evaluations for oversight over the executive by parliament on one hand, but on the other hand, since parliaments themselves enact legislation for the establishment and operation of national evaluation systems, also creates an opportunity for parliaments to better situate themselves within those systems. In terms of deepening scholarship in the area, I think everybody's mentioned the importance of collaborative platforms, the need to engage at the academics and civil society. And I think the important point that was made is to strengthen the interaction between internal evidence sources, such as research functions and library functions and parliamentary budget offices within government, as well as and the external evidence sources. Also, consensus and cross-party collaboration is also critical in driving evidence use. But as much as the volumes made a significant contribution, I think that there's still areas of research that need to be explored. These include, how can the portfolio of evidence sources be diversified to reduce dependence on the executive and for better validation and triangulation, including harnessing grassroots civil society engagement as part of that process. How to deepen the culture of evidence use to shift the nature of oversight from compliance and control to accountability for results and developmental impact. How to create incentives for evidence use at a macro level of the whole institution and at the level of committees and individual parliamentarians. What are the most effective ways to build capacity to establish and maintain systems of evidence use in African parliaments, especially at committee level, given the constraints that they face? And how can parliaments use new technologies instead of deepening the digital divide? How can we use those technologies to include more people within participation processes led by Parliament? And what M&E legislative reform or alterations to parliamentary rules may be required to better embed the systemic use of evidence? In South Africa, we just had a court case which states that Parliament needs to enact for itself stronger powers of inquiry. Can we look at requiring environmental or regulatory or gender impacts, as some of the case studies in the book have looked at? So those are my thoughts. I will just stop sharing my screen and hand over to Candice.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And I really always enjoy listening to your inputs, and particularly it comes through in your contributions to the book as well. Really drilling down into the machinery of how things work, and what really is it going to take for us to perhaps know more about how it works, and then to see what needs to be done in order to be a catalyst for change in where things are not working that well. So thank you so much for those inputs. Just a quick note to say that we are running over time, and we profusely apologize for this. Clearly, this is one of the reasons why we've got 2 volumes and we couldn't stick with one. So we are true to brand, but we really do hope that you can just stick around with us a little bit longer. Remember, there's that competition coming up and you might just win a copy of the book. We now do have Dr. Kobena Hansen, who's going to be doing the facilitated discussion. So many great questions coming up. So Dr. Hansen is the head of Secretariat of the African Parliamentarians Network on Development Evaluation, which is APNODE. He is also the Principal Evaluation Capacity Development Officer at the African Development Bank in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. Dr. Hansen's research interests straddle issues of disruptive innovation, evaluation capacity development, natural resource governance, knowledge management, and public policy. He has published in peer-reviewed journals such as Environment and Planning, GeoJournal, Journal of African Development, African Geographical Review, as well as Africa Today. Kobena, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Candice. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me well.
It sounds a little bit distant, but I can certainly hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think my internet, so if I start to fade, I might just have to turn off my camera so that at least we can save some bandwidth and then do that. Yes, so just alert me. So yes, first and foremost, thank you. I know we're running out of time, but I also want to say thank you to everybody who's spoken, from Linda. I think participants will agree with me that we've heard a lot about these two volumes. The speakers so far have touched on critical aspects that are captured in the volume in terms of evidence use in parliaments, not only the systems nature of it, but also how we ensure that we basically enhance and advance these issues, whether it is drawing on issues of capacity development approaches, seeking best fit approaches that are context specific that we can use, how we basically draw on behavioral change like Rose mentioned, and similarly, Josephine had talked about issues of innovation, but for innovation, you need that behavioral change. We also see that Dr. Philip Bouchere had also mentioned, issues of the media. These are key partners, the champions. How do we leverage people from within to basically drive these issues forward such that we enhance not only the generation, but also the utilization, the demand for this critical evidence use that shapes the outcomes of parliamentary decisions, shapes budget outcomes, and ultimately shapes development. Because as Dr. Chikuka had also said, Senator Chikuka, pardon me, that we are not too far from 2030, right? So basically, even as we're coming out of a post-COVID world where things have definitely taken a hit, right? We also have some tools to leverage. And I think Professor Tanya mentioned that with the whole technology and digitalization taking place, I mean, the whole boom in new media, I guess parliamentarians, parliaments, and people that engage with also have different tools that can be leveraged. We saw this during COVID. The people were reaching out to their stakeholders in unique ways. And I think these are all critical things that will be needed if we're going to be able to make evidence use accessible and widely utilized such that it benefits everybody. Because yes, the changing dynamics are obvious, both within and beyond Parliament. The importance, as has been said, in terms of learning from each other, leveraging different learnings, either it's parliamentary exchanges or just peer-to-peer learning. I think these are all very critical. So I don't necessarily want to rehash the wonderful things that have been said. But I think what is important now is to give participants on the call an opportunity so that we can also hear from you, and we can also hear your experiences. And if you have specific questions, you can direct it to the panelists and the speakers before. In the interest of time, I would say that let's be very, very specific with our questions and straight to the point. I know sometimes as Africans, we like to tell stories before our questions, but if we could be very specific, that will be very helpful. So I don't know, Candice, do you, should we give people opportunity to sort of like open their mics and speak, or should we just take the questions that come within the chat box? I just want, so I know some people have their questions in the chat box already, and so that they don't feel marginalized. And then some people may want to actually speak. So I don't know what format you feel will be best, given the time constraints.
This is the challenge, Kobena. So there are so many great questions. I think you're going to have to do a random selection of maybe just one or two for now, and then perhaps ask those who posted the question to perhaps unmute and speak to the question, and the panelists can answer, and we see how much time we can, how many of those we can do. But it's up to you. This is your time.
All right, thank you. So maybe what I'm going to try and do is see how to balance it. So I'm going to start out maybe with 2 questions from the chat. And then once those have been answered, I'll also let people maybe take another 2 from the floor where people can unmute their mics and then pose their questions. So I think the first question I'm going to take, and I'm sort of like, sorry, I'm just selecting here. It comes from, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, it's Phililani and Dlomo. And the question is, how do we deal with the situation where members of parliament are presented with scientific evidence and they deliberately ignore the evidence due to political reasons? I think this is open to everybody, all the panelists. So I don't know which of our panelists would want to answer that. And then the second question I'm going to take here comes from Diana Warira. And basically her question is, what do we really need to do to enhance the budgetary allocations to parliamentary work, i.e., e.g. capacity building as well as research? Okay, so we'll take those two questions first. I'll come back to more. I don't know if maybe Josephine, you want to take the one on budget enhancing the budgetary, and then I'll let Rose take the earlier question that came. So Josephine. Sorry to put you on the spot. Hi, Josephine. Are you able to respond to that? Or who from the panelists would want to respond to those two questions?
Chair, can I?
Sure. Dr. Philip, please go ahead.
I want to give a shot at the first question. Thank you for the question where members are presented with evidence and it says they, due to political reasons, they refuse to just make the right decision, something like that. I think Dr. Ronje in her presentation spoke about an issue of behavior change. And for us to be able to change this is something that we need to institutionalize the culture of using evidence. And at the same time, in terms of governance, it means also the political parties we are having need to begin to appreciate, based on the ideologies they support, they should not be muzzled by the executive. And also what this initiative that CLEARAA is doing is a step in the right direction, because research indicates that the executive is normally very well endowed with information or evidence, as opposed to parliaments. So when we begin to build the capacities of parliaments to have their own fully fledged research where they can get this evidence, it therefore in the long term will become easier for members to begin to appreciate the use of this evidence, and therefore they will hopefully begin to make the right decision. But as Dr. Ronje pointed out, it's an issue of behavior change, which will take time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prof. Tanya?
Can I also come in on that, right? I'm especially thinking of the work that I've done on costing legislation, right? Where the executive says it's going to cost us so much, but you do your own costing, and you find that actually it's going to cost way more and actually be unaffordable. So I think that it's important that you can't build the culture of evidence in Parliament without building the culture in the broader governance system. So for me, it would be important not only to communicate to Parliament, but also to communicate with the executive as well, and also with broader civil society. So it's important to get that information out. There are platforms like The Conversation, which allow academics to write short articles. It gets syndicated by the media so that MPs don't just hear an academic's voice. They also hear what civil society organizations, who will typically pick up on that research, also think about it. And that might create more leverage. Also, it might become more important on the party's agenda, which could also create more discussion there.
Thank you. That's beautifully responded to. I hope our participants are satisfied in that regard. Okay, so I see a hand been up. Feruzi Ngwamba, if you can unmute yourself and pose your question, please go ahead.
Thank you so very much, Chair. My name is Feruzi Ngwamba. I'm Access Program Coordinator, College of Humanities, Pietermaritzburg campus of UKZN in South Africa. My question is around the issues of countries that don't have institutions. Perhaps institutions have collapsed because of wars or corruptions or lack of funding. How do we collect evidence for policy-making decisions? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Feruzi. So basically, countries without institutions or countries where institutions have fallen to disrepair either through conflict or for whatever reason, where institutions are weak. And this again ties into the capacity building issue that was spoken about. But again, I'll ask one of our panelists, I don't know whether Philip, Rose, Josephine, or Prof, if any of you want to speak authoritatively to this, that what strategies are available for people in such countries?
Yeah, maybe if you may, Chair, I would want to try and respond to that from a purely conflict perspective.
Sure.
If a country, for example, has undergone conflict, we normally will have a situation where now this country is subjected to what we call post-conflict reconstruction initiatives. And through such initiatives, there will be no vacuum. They will be collecting evidence that that corresponds to the conflict situation. And through this sort of information, they begin to reconstruct, because the idea is to reconstruct the collapsed institution. So that way, with various support, we can then rebuild those institutions. But also the other question had a twist to it. There are countries where institutions have collapsed, but they are not in a conflict situation. This probably would be characterized by countries that we say do not respect the rule of law. They are not, they don't practice that democracy. And the only situation here is we must then need to, these countries would then need to allow the democratic space, and we know how this plays out. It becomes a struggle for some kind of liberation to bring back on course those institutions so that they are able now to play their role effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Philip, Dr. Bushiri. All right, I'm going to go back to chat Q&A because I see some other questions there. And okay, I'm taking the first question from Grace Igueta, and this is directly for Josephine Ouattara. And basically the question is that, what is the political tension, right? The political tension between internal and external evidence, and the mechanism, what mechanisms are there to address that, to maximize values of both sources. There's a second question also directed at Josephine. This is from Lucy Makara. And the question is, that, okay, in terms of evidence, right, to provide an alternative policy for the country, there's also evidence available for members in the ruling party in considering decision-making. So, how do you, I guess, reconcile the two? So this is directly at Josephine. So if you can respond to this, then after, basically, if there are others also among the panelists that want to speak to this, they can also do that. So Josephine, kindly go ahead. Is Josephine still with us? Are you still with us?
I was just going to say, I wonder if she's got network problems because I don't actually see her name up on the list of in the panelists view. So she might have just dropped off, Kobena.
Okay. So then I'll basically just open it up. If any of the panelists want to attempt to address the question between the potential tension between internal and external evidence and what mechanisms are needed basically to address that, such that we can maximize the value of both sources.
Yeah, if I may.
Sure, Philip, kindly go ahead.
I think when we look at this evidence, there is one critical thing that will be contested about the evidence, both external and internal. This would revolve around the authenticity and integrity of the evidence we are bringing before a parliamentary committee, for example. And for us to resolve this, I think we need to look at it at two levels. The first level will be the external level, when we put up a mechanism of where the external agency that is bringing that evidence works together with the internal body in parliament. They would be able to resolve these as before the evidence is brought to the parliamentary committee. That's why we are insisting on collaborations between the parliaments and these research policy think tanks. Then at the second level where we need to resolve this would be internally. We are setting up, remember I discussed about the parliamentary budget offices. I talked about the establishment of legislative research departments. One of the key roles of these is that they are supposed to receive evidence from multiple sources. And one of the things internally they are supposed to do also is, based on their internal data they are building, they need to also authenticate the validity of that evidence. So internally, that is how we need to put up systems that would be able to check these. And this can also become more useful when we enhance information or evidence sharing between even the executive, the external bodies, and all these. So those are some of the broad levels in terms of mechanisms that I would think we need to put in place to try and resolve that potential tension. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Philip. That's very insightful, and I'm sure that answers it well. Okay, so going back to Q&A, I'm going to take two other questions. The first is from Stefan Paulson, and basically he draws our attention to the fact that, on the continent we have 51 parliaments, 59% of which are bicameral and 41 are unicameral. So his question really is, how do these two systems of parliaments learn from each other in terms of strengthening evidence use, and what does that actually look in practice? The second question that I'm going to take comes from, wait, okay, I think that's just the only question there. Yes, the rest are comments, so we don't necessarily need to respond to those. So again, I'll repeat the question to our panelists, that, given that we have two types of parliamentary systems, how do these two systems learn from each other in terms of strengthening evidence use, and then what does it actually look like in terms of practice?
I can maybe make a comment to that.
Sure.
Kobena.
Sure, Rose. Kindly go ahead.
Yeah, and briefly, and others can come in. I think that the use of the principles in terms of use of evidence apply often across different contexts and sectors. And so when you think about the roles of parliaments, the unicameral and the bicameral, thinking of those largely 3 to 4 roles, evidence can be applied, and we can draw lessons from whatever parliament it is, regardless of whether it's unicameral or bicameral. I'm saying that because we've learned a lot. We've implemented quite a bit of work in Malawi, and we've drawn a lot of lessons, Malawi Parliament, I mean, from South African Parliament, which is largely very different, the way it's set up with the Malawi Parliament. Our drawing of lessons has focused largely on the technical departments, some exchange programs between the different departments within the different parliaments, but mostly looking at the technical groups and how they do what they do as far as evidence is concerned, and sharing some lessons between what's happening in the Malawian Parliament, again, within the technical departments charged with providing evidence, that is the Research Budget Office. So at that point, the fact that the two parliaments are very different has not been a big obstacle for the exchanges and the learnings that we have done, because basically the principles in terms of how these departments support members of parliament or senators have been the same. But having said that, of course, the issue of context is so critical. I keep going back to that. It can make things happen or break. And so being clear before we start learning from each other in terms of which parliament is more like our parliament and what can we learn. And if a parliament is very different from your parliament, it's important to be very clear on what do we really want to learn from them. But even as we learn from them, knowing very well that there are different parliaments, there are different contexts. And so whatever we learn from there, how can that be adapted for our context? Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think at APNODE, basically, we cover the continent and engage with parliaments across. So again, we have to sort of like straddle this. And like you're saying, people seeking and utilizing evidence, right? They're actually going to need the same types of support. The context may be slightly different, and that's why we always go for fit for purpose rather than quote unquote best practices. But invariably, right, everybody's seeking a good support system that creates that broader enabling environment within their parliament that enables them to better deliver and draw on basically utilizing the evidence. Okay, I think Josephine is back with us and I see her hand is up. So Josephine, yes, please go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick that question. Sorry, I dropped off, so I'm going to talk off video on the difference. I'm studying the Uganda and the South Africa Parliament on the difference and the extent of use between the unicameral and bicameral. So bicameral offers more opportunities that sometimes when evidence has been ignored by one level, then it can find its way in the other level. So it offers more opportunities, though of course at the level of unicameral, when they ignore evidence, then it is totally lost. So I think that there's a little bit of the extent of use that creates a difference just beside what Dr. Ronje has mentioned. While the approaches and the need is the same, the strategy on how to push through, you have more opportunities when you're under the bicameral system than the unicameral system. Thank you.
Thank you. So Candace, if I can, I'm just spotting one question that went to the chat box. And I think this question is from Marie Gada, and it's directed at Rose. So basically the question is, in addition to the structures, the processes, the incentives, the behavior change and capacity building ownership, is there any role for ratings and regional competition for being the most evidence-informed parliament? And then the second part of the question is, how can civil society be brought in to hold parliament accountable for being evidence-informed?
Thanks, Kobena. So I'll speak that quickly because I've also put a comment in the chat box. Yes, there is a role for that. I like the idea of competition. Actually, peer-to-peer learning somehow as an approach, parliaments and even executive departments and ministries like that very much, where they learn from what other people are doing in a similar role as a government or as a parliament or as a ministry. So I think that competition thing would be very welcome. It would also be an exciting thing for parliament. And in terms of peer-to-peer learning, it's already happening. Of course, the idea of competition hasn't really come in terms of a prize, for the most evidence-informed parliament in Africa. That would be great. And I think Kobena is probably something the APNODE could think about, in terms of having something like that. It would definitely be an incentive. I'll give an example. As AFIDEP, we convened the network of parliamentary committees on health. So it's committees across the region who meet every year. Whenever they meet, they make commitments, but they also report on previous commitments. And the issue of competition comes in committees not wanting to come and report the same things or have nothing to report. And so you find that MPs, of course, are very keen to implement their commitments, that when the convention happens every September, October, they have something to report. So a sense of competition has been good because it's parliaments talking to each other, each of them saying, we committed to this, we did this, we didn't do this because of ABCD. So there's kind of peer learning, collegiality, but there's also some pressure there in terms of not being one to be seen that every year you come and say the same thing or say nothing. So competition is good. I think Mary wants to know where that would fall, who would do that. Of course, it would need funding. I think that it's a conversation we can have on the side. AFIDEP obviously work in this space, would be very interested in exploring a convention like that and exploring funding. Of course, we don't have funding currently, but also I think APNODE is a network across the region. So yeah, it also provides a very good platform for that, which would be happy to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. I think I'm going to take just one more question or intervention, and I see, Josephine, you have your hand up, because I know we're running out of time. I'm sorry if others had questions. We can do this after. Josephine.
No, put it down, sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. So if you put it down, I've seen one hand from the attendees, but it's gone down. So I'm also assuming that we can, it's back up. All right, so that'll be the last one I'm going to take. I'm just trying to
might have to try to ask for that participant to be very, very brief because we are very much over time right now. But thank you so much for everybody who still stayed up to now.
Okay, so please, I'm trying to see whose hand is up, but I can't. So just kindly unmute yourself and pose your question.
Thank you so very much. That's my hand. I just wanted to raise one point. When we are talking about Africa, let's not a mistake to consider it as a country. The way other people have been considering it, let's consider as a continent with many countries, with different issues and different interpretations in terms of governance. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Feruzi. I think that I think all our panelists and everybody who's spoken does share the same view with you that yes, there might be some similarities, but the context, as Rose keeps stressing, is very important. We do acknowledge that these are individual countries, the situations are different, the contexts are different. Yes, there's some similarities and we can learn from each other, but we're in no way saying that it is a country and everything is the same. So thank you. And thanks again, Candice, for having me, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Kobena. And that was a very, very hard session to facilitate because so many of these questions were so great and really requires, quite in-depth conversation. And that also tells us as a team, I think, about what we could do. This doesn't have to stop here. This is just the launch. And certainly we can think about having other sessions, even some specific guided discussions around some of the specific issues that have been raised today. And here we have Dr. Caitlin Blazer-Mapita, who's a senior lecturer and research director at Wits University in the School of Governance, and also a co-editor of the publication. She has more than 10 years experience working in monitoring and evaluation, research, organizational development, and capacity building. Her background has focused on interdisciplinary rural governance, and her work has been with organizations advocating in sectors of inequality and climate justice. And Caitlin, thank you so much. You've got the wonderful task of synthesizing everything in 2 minutes. Over to you.
Luckily, I tend to talk very briefly, so I'll do what I can, although it's difficult to do justice to the synthesis because this has really been such an exciting project to be part of. It's gone on over many years, and I feel like this launch is really a landmark in the progress we've made, I think, really as a collective, which has been, I think, absolutely the strength of the discussion so far. So just in terms of broad reflection, I think something that really struck me, both working as part of the project and then also hearing the conversations today, are the common agendas parliamentarians, MPs, as well as people working in the evaluation space have found to improve governance from their own perspective and standpoint. And I think an important first step is just reflecting, taking stock, and more deeply understanding what is currently happening. And I have really appreciated the opportunity over the past few years, actually, of this engagement providing some of that space. I think some of the reflection that has gone on has really shifted the way I've understood governance and our role within it. And I think these volumes have been a start in playing what small role we can in making positive change. And that has been through sharing, through collaboration, through transparency, making information more readily available. And for that, I thank everyone who has contributed, because I really think it has been a concrete step of working, within our own competencies and areas of expertise to strengthen governance in our own little corners. What has also become apparent is that we really have a common advocacy agenda in pushing for a power shift and a landscape change in the way government is responding to global challenges in our current context. I think the pandemic has made it particularly evident that we urgently need certain steps to be taken by government to respond more effectively to the challenges that face us. I think as we look forward to the multiple systemic interrelated crises of climate change, of inequality, I think it becomes more and more clear that we need to both call on evidence and call on our roles within governance to make sure that that the government response is effective as it can be. And I think that's all I'm going to say. I would like to thank everyone for the contributions they've made on that. And it's been an honor to be part of the process.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. That was really succinct, and yes, it is really difficult to synthesize, but I think you did an amazing job. We are really at the tail end, and now we are at the point where we actually can announce the winners of the 5 copies of the book. So Talita, are you ready?
Yes, thanks, Candace. Once again, colleagues, apologies for taking your time. I'm just going to quickly announce the winners and then we'll be off your way. Please don't judge my busy screen. So we just randomly ran a raffle on an online platform that just randomly picked the following names. So congratulations to Nompumelelo Murumbata, Sandra Asafo Ajay, Maria Kieta, and Tutu Falani, as well as Tanya Mazonde. So we will be in touch to communicate couriering your books. So you will get both versions of the book. Thanks, Candace.
Congratulations. I'm so happy for you, because this means that you can get straight into reading, and hopefully those who've heard all the wonderful contributions today are also inspired to, in fact, get a copy for yourselves. And we also hope that you will engage with us as you read through some of the case studies, you read through the theoretical content. Please also do reach out to us and engage with us on the content, and look out for further engagements as we take this program further. We are indeed at the end, and I see Kgotatso has put her video on. So thank you so much. This is the end for my input on the side, but the thanks are not my job. That is the job of Kgotatso, and she'll be doing that. But just from my side personally, thank you so much to everybody. It was a wonderful day. Kgotatso, over to you.
Thank you so much, Candace. And I just want to, again, just reiterate congratulations to the winners of the 5 books. As Candace has said, we have now arrived at the final moment of what really has been a wonderful and inspiring occasion. As we all know, the success of occasions like this is never possible without many hands, minds, and hearts being involved. So on behalf of CLEARAA, I want to first again extend our gratitude to all of our contributors to the book, the institutional and individual collaborators who gave their time, their energies, and commitment to make the publication possible. Many of you are here as participants and as guests, and we're really grateful that you're able to join us to celebrate through this launch. We're also grateful to our publisher, African Sun Media, who walked the journey with us and supported the stewardship of the editorial committee for the publications. And I also must acknowledge our institutional funders and those who made support possible for the volumes to actually be generated. And that is the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, for supporting the collaborative peer learning initiatives in parliaments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, who supported CLEARAA's Accelerated Visualization Project, or the ASA project, and the Global Evaluation Initiative. We really could not have come to where we are today without these institutional partners. Finally, for today's event specifically, we just want to extend appreciation to the CLEAR team who organized the launch, to APNODE. We're grateful to Senator Chikukwa, who joined us in his capacity as the member of the Executive Committee of APNODE. We want to thank all the panelists for sharing your wisdom and insight, and all of you who registered, the participants, and really made this possible. It would not have been possible without you, and so we're really grateful. Just to say that we will be emailing the presentations made in the webinar to everyone who registered. So you are sure to receive those. I think there were several requests made in the chat. So on that note, friends, colleagues, compatriots, and fellow collaborators, I can now pronounce that we have concluded our launch celebration, and we wish you well, and we thank you again for spending this morning with us and even the extra time. Thank you so much.